I really want to thank everybody for inviting me. It's really an honor to be able to speak with you today about the IOLTA program, the IOLTA board, and the rules that govern attorneys in their practice of law related to IOLTA accounts. My name is Stephanie Libhart, and I have the privilege of serving as the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania IOLTA Board. I've been employed by the IOLTA Board for about 12 years, 8 as its Executive Director. Anshi, you can go to the next slide. So the topics that I'll cover are listed on this slide. I'll cover Rule 1.15 funds and why the bank that you pick matters. We'll talk about, of course, real estate settlement accounts and the IOLTA rules. We'll talk about exclusions and exemptions, the difference between them and how to apply. Frequently asked questions related to credit card deposits in your IOLTA account. How to comply with the Pennsylvania IOLTA program when you are a Pennsylvania attorney but you're practicing out of state. Unclaimed funds in your IOLTA account. The Supreme Court adopted a new rule in June of 2018, so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then, of course, I cannot do a CLE on IOLTA without talking about legal aid and the importance of pro bono. So the IOLTA board, you might be wondering, what is it? I know I have an IOLTA account, but I don't know what those people do over there. So the IOLTA board is an instrumentality, a nonprofit instrumentality of the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. There are 9 board members, and each board member is appointed by a Supreme Court justice. The IOLTA board is the largest funder of civil legal aid in Pennsylvania. Currently, we administer 6 different revenue sources. And in the current year, we awarded more than $26 million to 35 legal aid organizations across the Commonwealth and each of Pennsylvania's 9 law schools. The IOLTA board is not an investigative or an enforcement agency. We administer the IOLTA program. We monitor attorneys for compliance, and we also offer technical assistance to attorneys to either achieve or maintain compliance. But under the IOLTA regulations, we are required to report to the Office of Disciplinary Counsel attorneys that are not compliant. We here, I and my staff try very hard to work with attorneys to get them on track, but in some cases we have had to make referrals to the Office of Disciplinary Counsel. The Lawyers Fund for Client Security serves 2 purposes, one of which is related to IOLTA accounts, so that's the purpose that I'll cover now. The banks that are approved by the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania to offer attorney trust accounts to Pennsylvania attorneys must sign an agreement with the Pennsylvania Lawyers Fund for Client Security to report dishonored checks to the fund. So when the fund receives a report from a bank, the fund investigates immediately. Now, dishonored payment report does not automatically create a disciplinary record unless the fund does have to make a referral to the Office of Disciplinary Counsel. The fund's process is swift, but it does provide the attorney an opportunity to explain the dishonored payment to the fund. And finally, the disciplinary board of the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, they investigate attorney misconduct and they impose discipline. The reason why I included this slide is because many times the 3 different organizations, all of us are boards under the Supreme Court, often get mixed up with one another, and attorneys aren't sure which office to call for what situation. So that's why I try to explain it here in my CLEs. The Rule of Professional Conduct 1.15 requires all attorney trust accounts to earn interest, either for the benefit of the client or for the IOLTA program. At a high level, IOLTA accounts are used to deposit client funds that cannot practically earn interest for the client. So we're talking about small amounts of money or money held for a short period of time. The interest that is earned on those IOLTA accounts is used for financially supporting legal aid to low-income Pennsylvanians without charge. And Anshi, we're ready for the video.
Wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and launch that right now. Thank you very much for sharing that. I'm going to switch back to your presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you. Rule 1.15 sets out specific ethical obligations of attorneys related to all kinds of duties: safekeeping of client property, maintaining trust account records, the duty to keep separate, exemptions, and unclaimed funds, as well as many other duties. We'll get to the unclaimed funds in a few minutes. The regulations that are available at the slide provide a more detailed guidance in a range of circumstances. Rule 1.15 funds are funds that do not belong to the attorney. Rule 1.15 funds, if you handle them, must be deposited into an interest-bearing trust account. And after you've determined that the funds are Rule 1.15 funds, then you'll decide whether they're qualified or non-qualified. If you do not receive Rule 1.15 funds in your practice of law, then you are automatically excluded from the requirement to maintain an IOLTA account. And we'll cover exclusions and exemptions in a few slides. So in the last slide, I mentioned that you'd have to determine whether they're qualified or non-qualified funds. So qualified funds are small amounts of money or money held in any amount for a short period of time. Examples of qualified funds are prepaid retainers, real estate settlement funds, personal injury settlements, prepaid filing fees or costs, and flat fees until the work begins or is earned. Qualified funds are deposited in your IOLTA account. Non-qualified funds are deposited into a non-IOLTA account that earns interest for the client. So how do you decide? Can it earn interest for the client or not? Are they qualified or non-qualified? So we recommend applying an economic benefits test. And by the way, the decision is based solely on your good faith judgment. If the money can earn interest for the client, then it absolutely should be deposited into a separate interest-bearing trust account to benefit the client. So the economic benefits test would include things like the total amount of the funds that you are holding, the length of time that you are going to hold on to those funds, the interest rate that the bank will apply to a separate account, the service charges or fees that the bank will assess, and also administrative costs to you, including your time establishing and administering the non-IOLTA accounts, the cost of preparing tax reports required for the income earned on the funds, and your ability to track, calculate, and pay income to the individual clients or third parties. So I stuck in here 2 frequently asked questions. The first one is, sometimes retainers only cover a few hours of work that's completed in a day or so. Does it still have to go into the IOLTA account? The answer is yes. Prepaid fees, until they are earned, must go into the IOLTA account. Second question, but only minimal interest will be earned if it's deposited in the IOLTA account. Does it still have to go in there? Yes. The minimal interest on your IOLTA account matters. There are more than 14,000 IOLTA accounts in Pennsylvania, and some accounts, true, produce greater interest than others, but the pennies earned on the small accounts add up. Last year, IOLTA income totaled more than $8 million. So let's talk about real estate settlement accounts. When a lawyer provides non-legal services, such as real estate settlement services, Rule of Professional Conduct 5.7 comes into play. Under this rule, the lawyer must comply with all rules of professional conduct, including the requirement to maintain an IOLTA account for the qualified funds, with respect to the legal and non-legal services, whether or not the non-legal services are provided through the law firm or a separate entity. As a comment to the rule explains, when a lawyer provides non-legal services, there exists a potential for ethical problems. Principal among these is the possibility that the client or the recipient of the non-legal services may fail to understand that the non-legal services may not carry with them the protection normally afforded with a lawyer-client relationship. Rule 5.7a, which is the rule on the slide, deals with lawyers that are providing non-legal services through their law firm. So when the non-legal services are provided through the law firm, the lawyer is required to comply with all rules of professional conduct, including the requirement to maintain an IOLTA account for qualified funds. The rule characterizes the non-legal services that are subject to this rule as those that are not distinct from legal services. The PBA Ethics Council has determined that real estate settlement services are not distinct from legal services. Rule 5.7c deals with lawyers providing non-legal services through a separate entity with which the lawyer is associated. In this case, the lawyer still must comply with all rules of professional conduct, including the requirement to maintain an IOLTA account for qualified funds with respect to the non-legal services, as the recipients of those non-legal services may mistakenly believe that those services carry with them the protection of a client-lawyer relationship. Therefore, the lawyer must adhere to all Pennsylvania rules of professional conduct unless exempted by 5.7d, which we'll talk about on the next slide. Rule of Professional Conduct 5.7d offers a safe harbor option if the attorney does not want 5.7c to apply. And recall that 5.7c deals with lawyers that are providing non-legal services through a separate entity, not the law firm. So under 5.7d, the attorney must make reasonable efforts to advise the recipient of the non-legal services that a client-lawyer relationship does not exist. As such, the protections of a client-lawyer relationship also do not exist. Under Rule 5.7d, the attorney must communicate, preferably in writing, to the person receiving non-legal services through a separate entity that the client-lawyer relationship doesn't exist. The communication must happen before entering into an agreement for the provision of non-legal services, and that communication has to be in a manner that's sufficient to ensure that the person understands the significance. The Pennsylvania Bar Association's ethics opinions do offer additional advice for complying with the safe harbor option, and that is 5.7d. So the advice includes: do not use Esquire or attorney at law after the attorney's name on any business cards, letterhead, or other correspondence for the real estate settlement business. They advise you to use separate listings in your building directory, also to have separate telephone, fax, and email addresses, separate advertising, and also that promotional materials for the non-legal services should not refer to the attorney's legal credentials. By default, the rules require compliance with the rules of professional conduct when a lawyer is providing non-legal services. To meet 5.7d, the burden will be on the attorney to show that reasonable measures were taken to inform the person receiving the non-legal services that the protections of a client-lawyer relationship do not exist. So let's get back to talking about the administration of your IOLTA account. So client monies are deposited in a trust account. Lawyers' monies are deposited in an operating account. No commingling of funds. I think this is probably the one section of Rule 1.15 that every attorney knows, no commingling. There is one exception. So 1.15H allows attorneys to deposit his or her own money in the account to pay service charges. The bank is not allowed to deduct fees for things like check printing and wire transfers from the principal balance in the IOLTA account or the interest earned. So you have to make arrangements with your bank to cover those charges. You can do one of two things. The bank can deduct those fees from your operating account, or if you choose to deposit your own money into the trust account to cover those fees, you want to make sure that you're keeping meticulous records. If the service charge is $50, deposit only $50 of your money to cover it and make sure your records notate that. Also, if you use your IOLTA account infrequently, resulting in several months of a zero balance, that might cause the bank to close your account as an inactive account. So you are allowed to deposit the specific amount required by the bank to keep that account open. This usually ranges anywhere from a penny to $50. And again, you have to document this in your records. Once you deposit qualified funds in an amount that meets or exceeds the minimum balance requirement, you should deduct any of your own fees that were deposited to keep the account open. Okay, staying out of trouble. So in the last 6 months, I have done several CLEs as a panelist in conjunction with the Office of Disciplinary Counsel and the Lawyers Fund for Client Security. So they are not here today, so I wanted to make sure that I shared some of the important points that they have made in previous CLEs with me. So based on that experience, the most important advice that I can share is to make sure you are performing your monthly bank reconciliations. I've heard the Office of Disciplinary Counsel say this is a rule of professional conduct. It is not a suggestion. So if you remember anything from this CLE, please let this be it. Performing monthly bank reconciliations gives you the opportunity to catch accounting errors by you or the bank. The bank makes errors too, and it allows you to catch those quickly and also allows you to stop fraud in its tracks. If you are subjected to an investigation by the Lawyers Fund for Client Security due to a non-sufficient funds report or the Office of Disciplinary Counsel, you will be required to turn over key records such as individual client ledgers, fee agreements, distribution sheets, and evidence of monthly bank reconciliations. So record keeping is essential. You should photocopy or scan all checks deposited with the deposit slips. Photocopy invoices paid from the trust account. Do not pay personal expenses from the trust account. And there's a few other suggestions on there as well. And then on the next slide, thanks Anshi, there are additional suggestions. So one of the common reasons given to the fund for a dishonored payment is the attorney grabbed the wrong checkbook. And that this happens often, to pay a personal expense. So the fund recommends using different color checkbooks for your IOLTA account, your operating account, and your personal account. Safeguard the checkbook. The attorney will be responsible for any errors or fraud committed by those whom the attorney has authorized to have access to the account. Also, avoid signature stamps. A signature stamp gives someone in your office an opportunity to misappropriate funds. Do not leave earned fees in the trust account. If an overdraft occurs, start your own investigation immediately. When the fund contacts you, it will speak volumes that you've already started looking into it. And lastly, do not ignore correspondence from the fund or the Office of Disciplinary Counsel. That's the worst thing that you could do. Please respond right away. It's definitely in your favor.
All right, so we have approached the first poll question of the day. So it'll give Stephanie a moment to catch your breath, because you've been giving us a lot of wonderful information. I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll real quick here. And this is regarding best practices for managing your IOLTA account. All righty, so the question is, or actually, I guess, which of these do apply or best apply for best practices for managing an IOLTA account? A, no signature stamps. B, use different color checkbooks for my IOLTA and operating accounts. C, do not pay personal expenses or withdraw cash from the IOLTA account. Or D, all of the above. I'll give a few more moments for folks to answer. And then we'll take a look at the distributions. Looks like we have 91% of the vote in. All righty, I'm going to go ahead and close out the poll now. And we're going to go ahead and take a look. I'll share with you the results. It looks like 98% of you answered D, all of the above, and 2% answered A, no signature stamps. I'll let Stephanie tell you all what the correct answer is.
Yes, you all got it right. I think I made the question really easy. It is all of the above. So good job. Okay. So I said earlier that we would talk a little bit about exclusions and exemptions. So as a reminder, I mentioned this before, Rule 1.15 funds are funds that don't belong to the attorney. So when we're talking about Rule 1.15 funds, we are talking about qualified or non-qualified funds. In my office, we receive a lot of email. Oh, you can go back. Sorry, I wasn't done with that one. Sorry, Anshi. So in my office, we receive a lot of emails and phone calls about the difference between exclusions and exemptions. If you don't receive Rule 1.15 funds in your practice of law, then you are automatically excluded from the requirement to maintain an IOLTA account. This is really common for lawyers who work in a corporate capacity, a government capacity, maybe as a professor or a law clerk, but it also applies to retired lawyers or lawyers that no longer practice law. If you do not fall into one of these employment categories or retired categories, but simply don't handle Rule 1.15 funds related to your practice of law, then you too are automatically excluded. We have heard, though, that from attorneys that do fall into this situation that actually prefer to maintain an IOLTA account just so it's available in those rare instances when they do find themselves handling Rule 1.15 funds. Again, you do not need to request to be excluded. Exclusions are automatic. Exemptions, however, are not automatic. Exemptions do require a formal request sent to the IOLTA board. So of the eligible circumstances that are listed in the regulations and also provided to you on this slide, the first is the most common. We rarely, if ever, receive exemptions for the other three. As to the second bullet, banks that participate in IOLTA voluntarily assess very low or no fees these days. And as to the third bullet, extreme impracticality was included in the regulations that were written a long time ago when banking had to be done in person. Nowadays, banking can be done from your PC or your phone, so geographical proximity to an approved bank is really no longer a concern. So how do you qualify for an exemption? So first, you'd send your request to my attention at the email address that's listed in the first bullet on the slide. You can send if you want to type up a formal letter and attach it to an email, that is fine, but you can also just simply write the letter in the body of the email. Either way is fine with me. To qualify for a low balance exemption, your IOLTA account average daily balance must be less than $5,000 over the last 12 months, the last 12 consecutive months of your IOLTA account. In order for our staff to verify that the average daily balance does in fact meet that $5,000 or less requirement, you must attach copies of your bank statements for your IOLTA account for the last 12 months. Now, granted exemptions are good for 3 years, but if your circumstances change, the circumstances that supported the exemption, if they change within that 3-year period, you are required to open an IOLTA account, contact us, let us know, and begin complying with the rules related to IOLTA accounts. Now, renewals may be sought within 6 months of the current exemption's expiration. And we do offer provisional 1-year exemptions for new lawyers or lawyers starting their own firms. But please note that exemptions are limited only to qualified funds. So even if you have an exemption from maintaining an IOLTA account, non-qualified funds still must be deposited in a non-IOLTA account, which is an interest-bearing trust account to benefit the client. Now, if an attorney receives an exemption from the IOLTA board, they must still deposit qualified funds. So remember, we're not talking about 0 qualified funds. We're talking about qualified funds that are on a 12-month basis, less than $5,000 as an average daily balance. So you're still handling qualified funds. But so you have to deposit them in a trust account that the bank knows is being used by the law firm. So reports of non-sufficient funds can be sent to the lawyer's fund for client security. And all other duties and responsibilities outlined in Rule 1.15 apply to the account, even if you've been granted an exemption from maintaining it as an IOLTA account. So I frequently receive questions about credit card deposits in your IOLTA account. And so we've identified two primary areas of concern. There are probably more, but these are the two main concerns that we at the IOLTA board think are important. So one is chargebacks and the second one is tax implications. So if a charge is disputed by a client, you have to make sure that the credit card company does not pull disputed funds out of the IOLTA account where it could take other clients' funds. There are third-party platforms. LawPay comes to mind. I usually see them at PBA events, but I'm sure that there are other platforms that allow a chargeback or disputed fees to be deducted from the operating account, not the trust account. As for the tax implications, there are two. So the IRS requires credit card processors to report gross credit card transactions to the IRS via a 1099-K. On that form, no distinction is made between the transactions for payment of services rendered and payments made advancing fees and expenses into the IOLTA account. So therefore, the amounts on that form reported by the credit card may not actually reflect gross income received by the attorney. So we recommend that you consult your tax professional on that. The second tax implication is that the IRS will impose a 28% withholding penalty if the name of the attorney or the law firm on the credit card company's account does not match exactly the name associated with the EIN on file with the IRS. So the bottom line is to work with your credit card processors to ensure that the name they have on file matches the name associated with your EIN. If you practice outside of Pennsylvania, the regulations still require compliance with the Pennsylvania IOLTA program when you receive qualified funds related to the practice of law in Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania's rules encourage IOLTA participation. So even if you were to receive a small amount of qualified funds as a result of your practice of law in Pennsylvania, the presumption is that they go into a Pennsylvania IOLTA account. Your Pennsylvania IOLTA account can be set up at the same financial institution as your other IOLTA accounts, so long as the financial institution is on the list of those approved by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to offer attorney trust accounts to Pennsylvania attorneys. And this includes almost 200 financial institutions, and it includes many national banks. So you shouldn't have any trouble finding an approved Pennsylvania bank elsewhere in the country. When you open a Pennsylvania IOLTA account at a branch outside of Pennsylvania, we suggest you use extra care to ensure that the bank has set up the interest to come to the Pennsylvania IOLTA board and not the IOLTA board in the state where the branch is located. We've seen this happen, and it happens pretty often, so please take extra care. We at the IOLTA board cannot certify your compliance to the disciplinary board with the IOLTA rules if the bank is not remitting interest to the Pennsylvania IOLTA board. So here are two questions that we get frequently about practicing in and out of Pennsylvania. If I have an exemption from the Pennsylvania IOLTA board, can I put Pennsylvania qualified funds in my New Jersey IOLTA account? And the answer is no. The Pennsylvania rules of professional conduct govern your practice of law in Pennsylvania, including funds received. So Rule 1.15 funds received as a result of your practice of law in Pennsylvania, whether they're qualified or non-qualified, must be deposited in a trust account with a bank approved by the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. The bank must be able to send reports of non-sufficient funds to the Pennsylvania Lawyers Fund for Client Security. If the account's a New Jersey IOLTA account, that requirement will not be met. Second question, if I have a Pennsylvania practice, but I'm working from my Chicago office, can I deposit Pennsylvania qualified funds in my Illinois IOLTA account? And the answer is no. If you deposit Pennsylvania qualified funds in another state's IOLTA account, you are not in compliance with Pennsylvania's rules. Prior to 2018, the IOLTA board received many phone calls from attorneys seeking guidance on the ethical distribution of funds in their IOLTA accounts when the client couldn't be located or they just didn't know who the money belonged to. So most attorneys that were calling us with this situation were preparing for retirement. They were winding down their practices after years, decades of use of the IOLTA account. So after fielding many of these calls for probably 2 or 3 years, and at that point, the rules of professional conduct were silent on that situation. So in June of 2018, the Supreme Court adopted Rule 1.15, V as in Victor, which provides that guidance. And as mentioned previously, the rules of professional conduct didn't answer that question. So the rule does talk about unclaimed, unidentifiable, and reasonable efforts. So let's start with unclaimed funds. Unclaimed funds have a known owner. You know who this money belongs to, but you can't locate them. And the attorney has made reasonable efforts to locate the owner and return the funds. So maybe you've sent letters that have been returned to you, or you just simply cannot locate the person. Unidentifiable funds do not have a known owner. And you might be sitting there thinking, well, how can that happen? The rules do require meticulous record keeping. Stephanie just told us all about how important it is to keep records, and that's absolutely true. But it does happen. And the remittances that we've received are usually from a deceased attorney's IOLTA account after the executor has dispersed all funds according to the records that were available to them. Speaking of records, a lack of records when you're looking at your IOLTA account should not lead you to conclude by default that the funds belong to the firm. You can only transfer funds from the IOLTA account to the operating account once they've been earned and you have documentation to go along with that transfer. Okay, reasonable efforts. So the rule requires a minimum of 2 years of reasonable efforts to return the funds to their rightful owner or attempts to locate the owner or identify the owner before you can remit them to the IOLTA board. So for unclaimed funds, so these are funds where you know the owner and you just can't locate them. If regular correspondence is unsuccessful, then the attorney should use efforts similar to those when you are attempting to locate a person for service of process. Telephone directories, voter registration records, online searches, things like that. For successor firms, if it seems from the deceased attorney's records that they started undertaking reasonable efforts to contact or return the funds to the rightful owner, you can rely on that time period for the 2-year countdown. You don't have to restart the clock on that.
Alrighty, so we are at our poll question number 2. I'm going to go ahead and launch it on our end here. And the question is, for what minimum length of time must an attorney use reasonable efforts to return funds to their rightful owner before they can remit them to the IOLTA board? A, 2 years, B, 3 months, C, 10 years, D, 2 weeks. We'll give the audience a few moments to answer. And I recently had an experience similar to this, but not with an IOLTA board or IOLTA funds. One of my dentists in a previous state I used to live in actually mailed me a check for, I guess, what was the balance of my account, which is credited back to me. So I had a little windfall there, about $47, which was really nice. But I was not expecting it, and I said, "Hey, well, it's a nice meal, a nice takeout meal there, I guess." So
For sure.
And we've got 95% of the vote in, so we'll give them another few moments here. Hopefully we can get that 100%. Alrighty, I'm gonna go ahead and close out the poll now. And I'll share with you the results. It looks like a resounding majority, 96% of us, of the audience rather, selected A, 2 years. And there's little smatterings of a few. So Stephanie, I'll leave it to you to explain the right answer.
Okay, so most of you, the majority of you got it correctly. So it's 2 years, but keep in mind that that's the minimum length. So if you need more time, you don't, our rules are not like the DAPA rules where after a certain period of time you have to send it to us. 2 years of reasonable efforts to return the funds or identify the owner is the minimum length of time. So you may hold on to those funds for a longer period of time, but it has to be at least 2 years. All right. So how do you get those funds to the IOLTA board under Rule 1.15V? So we try to make it as easy as possible. The instructions and the required forms are on our website. If you have, after you've looked at the forms on the website and the instructions, if you have questions or unusual circumstances that you'd like to talk through with us, please feel free to call my office by phone or email. We have very friendly people here who are more than happy to talk through your situation and help you comply with 1.15V. So when you would submit the remittance report and certification along with your check made payable to the Pennsylvania IOLTA board to the address that you see listed on the slide. The IOLTA board will review the report and the certification, and if we determine that we can accept custody of the funds, you'll receive a letter for your records confirming that we have accepted the funds and we've accepted custody. If we cannot accept the funds, we will return the check to you with an explanatory letter to let you know for your records why we couldn't accept it. So you might wonder, well, why wouldn't you accept it? And so the two most common reasons we can't accept it is one, that we cannot accept custody of funds where the owner's last known address is in another state. And we can't accept custody of funds if reasonable efforts have not been made by the lawyer to return the funds to the owner prior to remitting them to the IOLTA board. So on that remittance report, you will be required to provide details. There's a narrative section. So you will describe for us what reasonable efforts you took to try to return those funds to the rightful owner. And if it's not, if it doesn't meet the reasonable efforts test, then we will unfortunately have to return those funds to you. Now, we have found in our experience that remitting funds from a deceased attorney's account can be complicated when an estate has not been opened, because only a licensed attorney or someone under their direct supervision may authorize disbursements from the IOLTA account. So we have found that certain banks will require a court order before any funds will be dispersed from a deceased attorney's IOLTA account. Okay, so if we can accept custody of the funds, then we will, we try to assist in the process of reuniting unclaimed funds with their rightful owner. So the rule does provide that an attorney or that the attorney or the firm that remitted the funds to us can reclaim those funds at any point in the future if the owner comes forward or is identified. So we try to assist in that process by sending a notice to the owner at the last known address that you've provided to us on that remittance form. And in the letter, we advise the owner that the IOLTA board is in possession of unclaimed funds to which they may be entitled. Now, in our letter, we direct them to contact the attorney or the firm that remitted them to us. That's part of the rule. So if we have been successful at helping to reunite owners with their funds, and it's not a lot of money we've been able to reunite, but still we've been able to reunite some funds. I am not sure why our letterhead catches the attention of clients more so than your letterhead, but we have had many attorneys who have remitted funds to us. We have accepted them, sent letters to those owners, and within the next week the lawyer has to reclaim the funds from us in order to repay those owners. So if the owner does contact you as a result of our letter, and we will send you a copy of our letter so that you can see what we, the communication we've had with that owner. And if you then agree that that person is the owner, because of course the owner will be contacting you, then you'll send us a form to reclaim the funds. That form's very easy, simple to fill out, and then we will mail you a check, and the check will be made payable to you. You will deposit that check in your IOLTA account, then you will cut and mail a check to the owner so that there's ample records in the IOLTA account for returning those funds to the owner. Then you'll send us a verification form that we have provided to you with our check, and it basically attests that you have returned the funds to their rightful owner. Now, if you are reclaiming the funds at a later point in time, maybe you're retired or you've changed jobs and you no longer have an IOLTA account, then at the time you need to reclaim the funds, you can just check a box on that form that instructs the IOLTA board to pay the claimant directly. And we have had situations where the attorney has done that. Okay, so I already mentioned for the reasons why we cannot accept unclaimed or unidentifiable funds. Again, the attorney didn't engage in reasonable efforts, or the owner's last known address is outside of Pennsylvania. If the owner's last known address is outside of Pennsylvania, then you should really just investigate the process for handling unclaimed funds in that state. In other states, the IOLTA program might be the right place to go. This is a common, it's becoming more common for IOLTA programs to be the recipients of unclaimed funds in IOLTA accounts. But in other states, it might be the treasurer's office or state treasurer's office or elsewhere.
Stephanie, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we did have a question come in.
Yes.
And someone is asking, are there any exceptions for de minimis funds? Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right.
Oh, you are pronouncing it right. And no, there is no exception for de minimis funds, except for the low balance exemption over 12 months, which we talked about. Okay, so as I mentioned, lawyers can reclaim the funds from the IOLTA board at any time if the owner comes forward. There's no time limit. All you have to do is complete that form on our website, and then we will make sure that you get the check that you can return to the former client. It's really important to note, though, that if you have been appointed as a conservator and you find yourself with unidentifiable funds in that IOLTA account, those funds get turned over to the lawyer's fund for client security. So you petition the appointing court to pay those funds to the lawyer's fund for client security, not the IOLTA board. Okay, the attorney registration form, which is going to be opening here, it's April 15th, probably in at least the next 3 weeks. The IOLTA board does not administer the attorney registration form or fee. That is done by the Office of the Disciplinary Board, but we do help coordinate that. But it's the administration of that is at the disciplinary board. So on this form, you have to disclose all of the accounts that you use to hold funds received as the result of your practice of law. IOLTA, our office, does run a compliance check on the information that you provide on that annual registration form. So if you provide an account, if you write an account number and you've identified it as a Pennsylvania IOLTA account, but we, the IOLTA board, we're not receiving any interest on that account, or the bank is not reporting that to us, then we will make contact with you by letter. So if you receive a letter from us about the account that you listed on your form, please contact us immediately so we can help you resolve that discrepancy. Most of the time, it's just a miscommunication between the attorney and the bank just simply didn't check a box in their system, and so we can help you resolve that. I mentioned earlier to not ignore correspondence from client security or the Office of Disciplinary Counsel. Please don't ignore letters from us. We want to help you. We are friendly. We want to make sure that you are in compliance, but this is the #1 reason why we have to refer attorneys to the Office of Disciplinary Counsel. When our letters are ignored, and we will give, we usually give you 2 and 3 chances. Sometimes we'll even call you. If we do not hear from you, we do have to refer you to the Office of Disciplinary Counsel. So in the IOLTA section of that form, you'll report all your Pennsylvania IOLTA accounts. Most firms have more than one. And you'll also report any other state IOLTA accounts in that IOLTA section. But on the question, does this account hold Pennsylvania Rule of Professional Conduct 1.15 funds? You're going to answer yes, only if that account holds funds related to your practice of law in Pennsylvania. If you check yes, and it's your New Jersey or your Maryland IOLTA account, you're going to get a letter from us. And this form is confusing. We try to provide feedback to the disciplinary board to try to make this a little bit easier. That's a common mistake. People check yes, and then it generates letters from us, and it takes your time and it takes my time. So if the IOLTA account that you are reporting on this form is not a Pennsylvania IOLTA account, do not check yes as holding Pennsylvania Rule of Professional Conduct 1.15 funds. And also, you will only select IOLTA exempt if you've actually received an exemption granted by the IOLTA board. In the non-IOLTA section of the form, there are different types of account designations that you can use to code all the other different types of accounts that you have related to your practice of law. Business accounts, the accounts that you have, the non-IOLTA accounts, the accounts that you are maintaining that produce income for clients. Okay, so this is the list of case types that are handled by legal aid. It's not a comprehensive list. These are just the most common. And of these, the most common cases that are handled are housing and family cases. I'm sure that doesn't come as a surprise. But legal representation in cases like these, it helps save the community's money by preventing homelessness, keeping people employed, helping families live safely without the threat of domestic violence. The IOLTA board recently commissioned a study by economists at Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and that study found a $12 return to the client and community on every $1 invested in legal aid. So how can you help? The best way, the easiest, no cost, simplest way for a law firm to support legal aid is to open your IOLTA account with a Platinum Leader Bank. Platinum Leader Banks support the mission of IOLTA by paying a premium interest rate on IOLTA accounts. The list of Platinum Leader Banks is on our website, and especially now when interest rates are so low, our Platinum Leader Banks are just our most treasured partners here at the IOLTA board. So we really encourage you to patronize them. If you don't see your bank on the list of Platinum Leader Banks and you're interested in trying to convince them to become a Platinum Leader Bank, I will be happy to partner with any attorney that wants to talk to their bank about becoming a Platinum Leader Bank. The banks are going to care more about their attorney customers coming and asking them to be a Platinum Leader Bank than they will care about me coming and asking them to be a Platinum Leader Bank. There are benefits to the bank to have this status. On an annual basis, we provide very detailed, valuable Community Reinvestment Act documentation that banks have been able to use successfully with their federal regulators over the years. There's one legal aid lawyer for every 6,415 people living in poverty today here in Pennsylvania. And pro bono representation by private attorneys is an enormously valuable supplement to the services of legal aid programs. And it's important to mention that any attorney that partners with at least an IOLTA funded legal services program does benefit from that program's malpractice insurance and training and support the whole way through the case. And all of the legal services programs that IOLTA funds really values their pro bono partners, whether you take one case or 10 cases. So I highly encourage you to reach out to your local legal aid program to offer your assistance. And if there's anything that I can do to put you in touch with the legal aid program that provides services to the community where you live, or if there's a special area of law that you're very interested in, maybe it's immigration or healthcare or utility law, I will be happy to help provide guidance on who you might call, and I'd be happy to make an introduction to the executive director of any program that might interest you.
Wonderful. All right, Stephanie, we are at your final poll question of your presentation. I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. And the question is, how can I support civil legal aid in Pennsylvania? A, open an IOLTA account with a Platinum Leader bank. B, volunteer to handle a case pro bono through your local legal aid provider, apologize. C, encourage your bank to become a Platinum Leader bank. Or D, all of the above. And we'll give a few moments for folks to respond. Looks like we have about 90% already of you responding, so that's wonderful.
This is an easy one too, Anshi. If you ask me to be a presenter again, I'm going to make harder questions.
Well, I think it's important. I personally have a question about this afterwards, but I'll reserve it for the Q&A session.
Okay.
But I'm going to go ahead and close out the poll, and we'll see what the response is. And I'll share it with you guys here. It looks like 98% of our respondents selected D, all of the above.
Yep, that is correct.
So that's wonderful. So yeah, my question, since we are on the subject of it, is as a non-attorney, what is the distinction of a Platinum Leader? What is the significance of that? Is that a special threshold? Is that do they just have a ton of money? Is it they sold 100,000 records? What does that Platinum mean?
So Platinum Leader banks provide a premium interest rate on IOLTA accounts. So right now, there are special rules for financial institutions in order to offer attorney trust accounts to Pennsylvania. So one of the Pennsylvania attorneys. So one of the big rules that banks have to follow, banks and credit unions, I should say, is that they have to pay what we call a comparable rate on IOLTA accounts. So there's a court order that says that the banks can't pay the IOLTA program a worse interest rate than what they pay their other similarly situated customers. So prior to this court order, the bank didn't really see the IOLTA program as a customer that they needed to please. So they would give us really bad interest rates while they were giving other customers better interest rates. So that court fixed that with an order back in, I think, 2007. So now banks have to pay us a comparable interest rate. But unless you've been living under a rock for the last year, everybody here knows that interest rates are close to zero. So a comparable interest rate today is about like 10 basis points maybe. So Platinum Leader banks pay us 75 basis points, which is huge. And makes a huge difference in the amount of income that we have in order to support legal services in Pennsylvania.
And in terms of volunteering for a pro bono case, again, as a non-attorney, what kind of cases would that look like? Is this disputes over where funds are moving, or?
No, so it's typically cases where a basic human need is at stake. So we're talking about eviction cases, unemployment denials, denials of public benefits, custody, child support, things like that.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm taking a look in the questions section and I don't see anyone there. So I know you've provided a ton of information, so I'm assuming that it was delivered well, and they're just mulling over everything you said. And I don't see anything in the chats, so we'll go ahead and end. I think we got started a little bit early, so I guess we'll end a little bit early there. And thank you so much for your time, Stephanie.
Thank you for the opportunity. It was my pleasure.